Cole Ashford stepped out into the Georgia sunlight with the smooth confidence of a man who owned everything he touched. His suit, a custom piece from Savile Row, clung to him like it was afraid to disappoint. The crisp blue of his tie matched the skies over Buckhead, the diamond cufflinks at his wrist catching the light like small, silent declarations of power. Beside him, the spectacle sharpened. Brielle Hart unfolded herself from the SUV's back seat, her white dress hugging every curated inch of her body. It was a calculated outfit, chaste in color, bold in cut. The neckline flirted with indecency, but the tailoring said class. She wore heels that dared the marble steps to slow her down, and a smile that hinted at secrets and confidence far beyond her 27 years. Photographers leaned forward. One snapped a burst just as Cole offered her his arm. She took it, and together they walked into the courthouse like royalty stepping into their coronation. Except it wasn't. The moment the glass doors closed behind them, the air changed. Quieter. Colder. The kind of sterile stillness reserved for places where consequences outlived intentions. "This is surreal," Brielle whispered, the words barely more than a breath. "Like, people are going to write about this." "They already are," Cole said without looking at her. "Just smile. Let them see what moved on looks like." He didn't say her name. He never did in public. Not anymore. Brielle adjusted the strap on her purse and glanced at their reflection in the polished brass paneling. "Do you think she's here already?" He exhaled slowly, smoothing the front of his jacket. "Marissa was never one to be early. She'll show up just late enough to make it look like this is beneath her." Brielle didn't answer. She just nodded like a good co-star in a movie she wasn't sure she'd be in by the third act. Cole tapped a message into his phone. Darren Coley, his lawyer, hadn't replied yet. Not unusual, but irritating. Today was supposed to be a formality, a prelude, a little paperwork, a little posturing. But the tension in his chest hadn't gone away. It had been 2 decades since he built Ashford Properties, from a rundown fixer-upper in West End to a skyline-defining empire that owned half the condos in Midtown and 3 of the top hotels in the Southeast. It was his name on the leases, the blueprints, the gala invitations. And yet, this morning, standing under the high ceilings of the courthouse, Cole Ashford felt watched, not by the press, not by Brielle, by something quieter, older, inevitable. They moved down the hall toward courtroom 4B. Their steps echoed, heads turned. Brielle leaned into him slightly, posing without being asked. Her perfume, jasmine and ambition, lingered between them. "Do you think she knows I'm here?" she asked softly. Cole smirked. "That's the point." But then the elevator opened at the far end of the corridor, and every ounce of certainty drained from his face. She didn't bring her sister or her friends. Not even her attorney walked beside her. Marissa Ashford stepped into the marble hallway alone. She wore navy blue, Chanel, if he wasn't mistaken, and her heels didn't so much click against the floor as announce her presence. Her hair was pinned back in a neat twist, and the only jewelry she wore was her wedding ring. Still, Cole stiffened. Brielle tilted her head. "Is that—" "Yeah." They watched as Marissa walked, not rushed, not hesitating, just walking. And yet the effect was undeniable. People moved aside for her. She passed them without a glance, her eyes fixed on the courtroom doors ahead. No acknowledgement, no insult, not even curiosity. To her, they weren't worth noticing. Cole's mouth opened to speak. He didn't even know what he'd planned to say. but the moment had already passed. Then a second figure emerged behind Marissa, Raymond Pierce. Tall, silver-haired, no briefcase, just a slim leather portfolio tucked under one arm. He wasn't dressed like the usual firebrand divorce lawyers Cole had hired and fought over the years. No shiny lapel pin, no oversized watch, just a perfectly tailored grey suit and the quiet presence of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to be obeyed. Coley hadn't mentioned this. He hadn't said anything about her changing counsel. As they neared the courtroom, Raymond nodded once at Coley across the way. It wasn't a greeting, it was recognition. Coley's jaw tensed. Oh, hell. Cole looked sideways. What? Coley didn't take his eyes off Raymond. She brought in Pierce. Should I know who that is? Coley turned, his voice low and tight. He's the guy you hire when you're not just trying to win a case. He's the guy you hire when you want the truth to become a weapon. Cole swallowed, a flicker of discomfort rising. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't know. Coley's voice was dry. I assumed she was still with Harper Langley. Well, she's not, Cole muttered, eyes back on Marissa. No. She was standing at the defense table now, flipping calmly through a few documents, while Pierce adjusted the microphone with surgeon-like precision. She didn't look at Cole. Not once. And that unnerved him more than 1,000 angry words could have. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors. Parties for Ashford versus Ashford may enter. Coley gathered his papers. Let's go. Cole offered Brielle his arm again. She hesitated. Are you sure I should sit in? She asked. He didn't answer, just nodded and led her forward. The courtroom was quiet. Too quiet. Brielle took a seat in the front row, just behind Cole. She crossed her legs carefully and opened her phone like nothing around her mattered. But it did. Cole sat, staring across at Marissa. She didn't acknowledge him. Instead, she leaned slightly toward Pierce and said something he couldn't hear. The attorney gave a single nod, then turned back to the judge's bench. Cole adjusted his tie. A bead of sweat formed just below his collar. This wasn't how it was supposed to feel. Not like walking into a trap. Not like the world he controlled was suddenly being held in someone else's hands. And certainly not like she, the woman he thought he'd buried beneath his ambition, was the one holding the pen that could rewrite his story. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. Marissa stood in front of the tall courtroom window, watching the sliver of light stretch across the oak-paneled floor. Her hands were still, steady, but her heart moved like waves under glass, visible only if you looked long enough. Outside, Atlanta kept moving. The clatter of traffic on Peachtree, the chirp of shoes on courthouse marble, the distant hum of elevators rising to floors where other stories unfolded. But in here, it was quiet. Too quiet. She turned away from the window and looked at the folder laid open on the table. Her life, reduced to exhibits and evidence tags. 22 years in the shape of receipts, wire transfers, text messages, legal filings. It was surreal. Would you like a moment before we begin? Raymond's voice was soft but firm. He stood a few feet behind her, not invading, not rushing. Marissa shook her head once. No. If I take a moment, I might fall apart. He didn't respond with sympathy. He responded with something stronger. Respect. I've seen clients fall apart for less, he said. You walked past your husband and his girlfriend without flinching. She turned to him, arms folding across her chest. Because if I looked at them, I wouldn't have made it through the doors. Raymond gave a small nod. He understood. She walked over, pulled the chair back, and sat down, The leather was cold against her palms. The air inside the courtroom felt too still, like the moment before a storm decides where to break. "You've read everything?" she asked. "Yes," Raymond replied, flipping open a separate folder, thinner but lethal. "Twice, including the most recent financial disclosures from Ashford Properties." A small pause. Then she asked, "Is it bad?" Raymond didn't look up immediately. He was giving her time, or maybe bracing her. "It's worse than we expected." A breath left her lungs, one she didn't realize she'd been holding. She leaned back in the chair, eyes closing briefly. "How bad?" she asked again, quieter this time. "There's a shell firm, BH Lux Branding," Raymond said. "It receives monthly deposits from Ashford's corporate account. Invoices labeled as consulting fees. No actual work product attached." Her eyes flicked open. "Brielle?" Raymond confirmed with a single, measured glance. "She's on the business ledger?" Marissa asked, incredulous. Raymond slid a printed sheet across the table. "Not directly, but the LLC is registered in her name. Delaware filing. Clean on the surface, but shallow enough to see right through." Marissa stared at the paper. The words didn't blur, but they did something worse. They stayed sharp, cold, certain. "I paid for her handbags," she murmured, "and her skincare, and her weekend flights to Miami. I paid for my replacement." Raymond didn't interrupt. He let the silence settle, let her sit with the ache of truth. Then, gently, "You funded her rise, while he told you the charity budget was being cut." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "He said we needed to tighten the belt this year, that donations weren't a priority with the new developments in Charlotte and Tampa." Another pause. Then she leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low. "I thought I was being unreasonable, spoiled. I thought maybe I was just used to too much." "You were used," Raymond said evenly. "Not to too much, but to being invisible." That word, it hit harder than she expected. Invisible. She thought of the parties she hosted for investors, of the nights she sat on cold museum benches waiting to court donors who never remembered her name, of the meetings she wasn't invited to anymore, of the credit she was quietly asked to give up. She blinked slowly. Her voice, when it came, was barely audible. "Do you know I picked the name? Ashford Properties." Raymond looked up. We were sitting in the kitchen of our first home, before any of this. He had a notepad, kept writing out combinations. Ashford Real Estate. Ashford Group. I told him Properties sounded like it already existed, like something trusted, permanent. Her lips curled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. He said it was perfect. I said, "It felt like us." She looked away, swallowing the lump that had risen too fast in her throat. "I haven't said that name aloud in weeks. And suddenly, it feels like a stranger." Raymond flipped a few pages, reorganizing the evidence with quiet precision. "Then maybe it's time to stop mourning what you built with him, and start reclaiming what you deserve." Marissa leaned back, the ache settling in her shoulders. "I don't want revenge." "I know," Raymond said, "which is why this is going to work." There was a knock at the side door. A court officer stepped in, speaking quietly to Raymond. He nodded, thanked him, and turned back to her. "They're about to begin. Judge Madeline Greer is presiding. She's fair, sharp, doesn't like theatrics. She'll see through him if we present facts, not feelings." Marissa stood, She smoothed her skirt, adjusted the single gold pin at her collar, her grandmother's. A reminder of who she was before she became Mrs. Ashford. Raymond picked up the slim folder and offered a last glance at her. "You ready?" "No," she said honestly. Then she drew a deep breath. "But I'm going anyway." They moved toward the courtroom entrance together, each step an echo of something larger: dignity, resolve, the slow gathering storm of truth. As she passed through the threshold, her eyes didn't search for Cole. They didn't linger on Brielle. She had no interest in performance. But she did glance at the courtroom nameplate, Ashford v. Ashford. She took it in, then let it go, and sat down. Brielle tapped her freshly manicured nails against the screen of her phone, scrolling mindlessly through Instagram as if it might somehow dilute the tension humming in her chest. The posts were all starting to look the same. Luxury bags on marble countertops, champagne flutes raised against sunsets, couples on white sand beaches smiling with teeth just a little too white. It used to excite her. Now it felt like static. As she adjusted her posture in the courtroom bench, shifting her weight so her hip angled perfectly toward the aisle, she knew there were cameras outside, probably still waiting. If she exited with a dramatic look, maybe touching her sunglasses, she could make page 6 before lunch. But here, inside this room, there was no ring light, no filter, just cold air, quiet judgment, and Marissa. God, she hated how calm that woman looked. Brielle glanced over at Cole, seated next to his lawyer at the plaintiff's table. He hadn't said much since the judge walked in, not even to her. His jaw was tight, his hands folded too neatly on the table. Every so often, he flicked his eyes toward Marissa, then away, like touching a hot stove. "Is she really not going to look at you?" Brielle whispered. Cole didn't turn. "Not now." Brielle frowned. "But I thought this was just preliminary. Why does it feel like a funeral?" Cole's silence was her only answer. She leaned back and crossed her legs, letting her heel dangle just enough to suggest she was unbothered. But underneath her composure was a flicker of something she didn't like: doubt. The judge, Madeline Greer, spoke firmly but without aggression. She had the kind of presence that quieted rooms without raising her voice. Every word was measured, every pause intentional. "The court recognizes counsel for the respondent, Mrs. Ashford," she said. "Mr. Pierce, you may proceed with your preliminary remarks." Raymond Pierce stood. He didn't walk to the lectern. He didn't need to. He simply rose beside Marissa, hands clasped in front of him, and began to speak. "Your Honor, we understand the purpose of this hearing is to review the enforcement of a prenuptial agreement. We are not contesting the existence of that agreement. We are, however, presenting concerns surrounding the conduct of the petitioner, Mr. Ashford, that may significantly impact the court's view of that agreement's application." Cole shifted almost imperceptibly. Raymond continued, voice low but sharp. "Specifically, we will be introducing evidence that suggests deliberate financial misconduct, misuse of marital assets, and fraudulent redirection of corporate funds under the guise of business expenses." The words dropped like stones in water. Brielle's head snapped toward Cole. What is he talking about? "Just let him finish," Cole muttered, but her pulse had already spiked. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you have supporting documentation?" "I do, Your Honor," Raymond said, lifting a single folder. "This includes preliminary forensic accounting reports and corporate transaction records. We will present those in full during evidentiary hearings, should the court deem them relevant." She nodded. "Duly noted." Then came the line that made the air shift. "Let the record show," Judge Greer said, that the court is open to reviewing any claims involving asset dissipation that may affect the equitable evaluation of property and financial standing, prenup notwithstanding. Brielle wasn't fluent in legalese, but she understood the message behind those words. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a minefield. Raymond sat down. Marissa didn't react. She didn't gloat. She didn't flinch. She simply kept her hands folded in her lap, one thumb lightly tracing the edge of her wedding band, the one she hadn't removed. That unsettled Brielle most of all. Cole leaned toward his lawyer, whispering something urgent. Brielle couldn't hear the words, but she saw the stress pulling at the corner of his mouth, the kind of tightness that meant something wasn't going according to plan. She hated not knowing. When court recessed for 15 minutes, Brielle followed Cole out into the hallway, matching his stride as reporters shouted muffled questions through the glass doors at the far end. "What the hell is going on, Cole?" "It's nothing," he said. "Nothing. He said you misused corporate funds. He's bluffing, trying to rattle us. Is it true?" He stopped walking, just enough to turn to her. "Why would I bring you here if I had something to hide?" That stopped her, but not for the reason he intended, because she knew the answer. Because Cole didn't just bring her to send a message to Marissa. He brought her because he thought the story looked better with her in it. Because he believed he was untouchable. Because he never once considered she might be holding the bag. Her voice dropped. "Cole, is my name on anything?" He hesitated. And in that flicker of silence, everything changed. "You said it was a consulting firm," she said, eyes narrowing. "A branding LLC. You said it was clean." "It is," he said, too fast. "Is it really?" He looked down the hallway. The doors to the courtroom were already opening again. "Brielle," he said quietly, "now is not the time." "No," she said, folding her arms. "I think it is." His expression softened for a second, maybe less. "You trusted me." She stared at him. "I trusted what you wanted me to believe." Then she walked back toward the courtroom alone. She didn't sit in the same seat. She moved one row back. Not far, but far enough. Cole watched her, jaw tight, shoulders squared. Marissa didn't turn around. She didn't need to. Every move told her what she needed to know. This war wasn't about who was louder. It was about who stayed standing when the noise was over. And for the first time since the papers were filed, the room began to feel like hers. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The overhead lights buzzed faintly in courtroom 4B, a low, constant hum beneath the judge's clipped voice as the hearing resumed. It was the kind of sound that didn't register until your nerves were stretched thin enough to notice everything. Marissa sat still, her spine a quiet line of resolve. She had barely moved since returning from recess. Even her breathing had settled into a deliberate rhythm, slow, steady, controlled. But her hands, they betrayed her, hidden beneath the polished oak table, one thumb rubbed at the edge of her wedding ring, again and again, like she was trying to wear down time itself. Raymond glanced at her, just once. "You're doing fine," he said under his breath. She gave a small nod. The truth was, she didn't feel fine, not remotely, but there was no room for that now. Her strength wasn't loud, it was in staying, in sitting, in not flinching, while the man who had once whispered promises into her neck now sat 3 feet away, pretending she was just another legal obstacle. Across the courtroom, Cole looked nothing like the man who had entered that morning with swagger and certainty. The confidence in his shoulders had shifted, subtle but visible. A small crease at his brow. a muscle ticking in his jaw. And he hadn't looked at her. Not properly. Not once. His lawyer rose, launching into a tightly rehearsed defense of the prenup. Your Honor, the document in question was signed willingly by both parties 22 years ago. It outlines clear terms of separation. Mrs. Ashford receives the marital home, a structured support fund for a period of 5 years, and maintains her current trust assets. The rest, including Ashford properties, remains Mr. Ashford's sole and protected property as per the terms agreed upon at signing. Judge Greer didn't interrupt. She simply made notes, her face unreadable. Coley pressed on. Furthermore, the document includes a non-contestation clause. Mrs. Ashford's counsel is free to make emotional appeals, but the law recognizes the agreement as binding. Emotional appeals? Marissa's jaw tightened. Raymond stood before the judge, acknowledged Coley's completion. He didn't move quickly. He didn't stride to the center of the room. He simply rose and stayed where he was, hands behind his back, his voice smooth as silk and twice as sharp. Your Honor, he said calmly, we do not dispute that the prenup was signed, nor do we intend to argue its terms on the basis of sentiment. We're here to question the conduct of Mr. Ashford during the course of the marriage, and more specifically, in the 18 months leading up to this hearing. Cole shifted slightly. Raymond's tone stayed measured. We have reason to believe that Mr. Ashford has engaged in a deliberate and sustained effort to reclassify joint marital funds as corporate expenditures. These expenditures include personal gifts, real estate leases, luxury travel, and retainer payments to a company that, on paper, appears to serve a consulting function, but in practice functions as a conduit. He lifted a paper from the folder. BH Lux Branding, LLC. Registered in the name of Ms. Brielle Hart. Monthly deposits of $50,000. No client reports. No deliverables. No business communications. Just a wire transfer. Like clockwork. A hush settled over the room. Brielle blinked slowly from the gallery, her arms now folded tightly across her chest. Raymond looked at the judge. We are not here to question love affairs, Your Honor. But we are absolutely here to question fraudulent concealment of marital assets. Coley started to stand again, but Judge Greer raised her hand without lifting her head. Mr. Pierce, she said, are you prepared to submit documentation of these transfers into evidence? Yes, Your Honor. Have you notified opposing counsel? They were included in the discovery folder last week. Cole's jaw clenched. Judge Greer turned to him directly. Mr. Ashford, would you like to address the court? Cole stood slowly. There was a pause, too long, before he spoke. Your Honor, he said carefully, Ashford Properties is a privately held company. As CEO, I maintain executive discretion over discretionary marketing budgets and consulting partnerships. All transactions were legal, properly categorized, and, frankly, not unusual for the size and scope of the business. He paused, glancing at Raymond, then at Marissa. Nothing was hidden. Raymond raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Judge Greer nodded slowly. We'll let the forensic report speak to that. For now, I'm accepting the financial disclosures into preliminary record. She looked over her glasses at both sides. But I'll remind everyone, if there's evidence of asset dissipation or intent to defraud the marital estate, it will weigh heavily on the court's decision, prenup or not. Marissa inhaled. That sentence meant everything. The tension in the room didn't break. It twisted, tightened, snapped into place like a wire being pulled taut between two anchors. Cole sat down without looking at anyone. Behind him, Brielle was now visibly anxious. She tapped her phone screen, swiped it open, and then locked it again. Her heel bounced softly. She leaned forward and whispered something to one of the junior associates from Coley's team, but the man just shook his head, eyes on the judge. She wasn't used to being ignored. Marissa, still silent, didn't move, but Raymond leaned slightly toward her. "You good?" he murmured. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, her eyes flicked to the courtroom doors. For the first time since this had begun, she saw the shadow of a familiar figure waiting just outside the hallway. Miles, her son, their son. He hadn't come in. But he was there, watching, waiting. And in that moment, Marissa's hands stopped trembling. She turned back toward the judge, lifting her chin just slightly. Because this wasn't about heartbreak anymore. It was about history. It was about legacy. And it was about proving, to herself more than anyone, that she had never been the silent partner in her own story. She had just been waiting for the right time to speak. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Marissa stepped inside alone. She didn't press the button right away. Her fingers hovered above the panel as her reflection stared back at her from the polished steel walls, stoic, elegant, composed. She barely recognized herself. Then, quietly, the doors began to close. Just before they met, a hand slipped through. The sensor caught it. The doors opened again, and there he was, Miles. He stepped in with a hesitant nod, tucking his hands into the pockets of his coat. For a moment, he didn't speak. Neither did she. The doors closed, sealing them into the small, still box. "Hi, Mom," he said, voice soft. Her eyes didn't leave the panel, but her lips lifted, barely. "You made it," she murmured. "I wasn't sure if I should come in," he said, glancing sideways at her. "But I needed to see you." She finally turned to look at him, her face a balance of pride and sorrow. "You watched from the hall." He nodded. "I saw most of it." Another beat. Then, softly, "You didn't even flinch, Mom." "Not once." She smiled, thin, weary. "I did, just on the inside." Miles let out a short, breathy laugh, but it carried weight. He shifted his stance. "Is it really as bad as it looks?" Marissa didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands, folded neatly in front of her. "It's worse," she said simply. "But it's also clearer than it's ever been." He leaned back against the wall, exhaling through his nose. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," she said gently. "Just being here, it matters more than you know." Miles stared at the floor for a moment. Then he looked back up, his voice lower. "I saw Dad's face when that lawyer started reading the transactions. He didn't expect it." "No," she said. "He didn't." A pause. "He brought her," Miles added quietly, as if still processing it. "Brielle. To court." Marissa looked up at the ceiling for a second, as if searching for patience she'd already exhausted. "I saw." It was cold. She looked at him now. It was deliberate. Miles nodded slowly. "I used to think he was better than this." Marissa didn't answer. She didn't need to. Then, his voice cracked, just slightly. He asked, "Did he ever love you?" The question was a whisper, but it landed like thunder. Marissa's eyes blinked once, slowly. Her lips parted, then pressed together again. She looked away. "There were moments," she said finally. "And there were years when I believed those moments were enough to build a life around." Miles didn't push. He just let it hang. The elevator stopped at the ground floor with a soft ding, but neither of them moved. After a moment, she spoke again. "Do you remember the gallery opening in Savannah, when you were 12? He furrowed his brow. "The one with the sculpture made out of driftwood?" She nodded. "Your father left early that night. You probably don't remember." "I do," he said. "He said he had a conference call." Marissa looked down. "That was the first time I knew something was gone. Not broken, just gone." Her voice softened. "But you gave a speech that night." "Do you remember that?" He smiled faintly. "I read off a note card and mispronounced 3 names. You had the whole room in the palm of your hand." She looked at him now, more directly. "You always have." Miles stepped forward, uncertain, but present. "You're not alone in this." She studied him for a moment, then reached up and tucked a stray curl behind his ear, something she hadn't done since he was a child. "I know," she whispered, "but this is still mine to finish." Outside, the courthouse lobby buzzed with activity. Reporters lingered by the columns. Attorneys checked their watches. But inside the elevator, time had slowed. Mother and son stood in quiet solidarity, the weight of truth between them, but not separating them. When the doors opened again, Raymond was standing just beyond them, one hand on his phone, the other holding a new file. He gave a small nod when he saw her. "They've moved us to Conference Room B for the settlement discussions," he said. "Judge Greer's ordered both parties to attempt mediation before continuing proceedings." Marissa stepped out, smoothing her coat. "Has Cole agreed?" "He doesn't have a choice." She glanced back at Miles. "I'll be out in an hour." He hesitated. "I'll wait." She smiled softly. "You don't have to." "I know. That's why I will." Raymond gave him a brief, approving look. Then he turned back to Marissa. "There's one more thing," he said as they began walking. "Cole's team submitted a list of disputed assets they want to pull from the marital ledger." She raised a brow. "Such as?" "The Midtown penthouse, 3 company cars, the golf club membership." He flipped the page. "And the art collection." Marissa stopped walking. Raymond paused too, waiting. Her voice dropped. "He's disputing ownership of the art?" "Specifically, the 27 pieces acquired between 2005 and 2019. She let out a quiet breath. "I picked every single one," she said. "I negotiated with the galleries. I arranged the insurance. He barely showed up for the openings." Raymond closed the file. "I know, and we'll make that clear." She resumed walking, but her tone had shifted. Firmer now, focused. "I don't want to win everything," she said. "Just the parts that are mine." They reached the door to the conference room. Cole and his lawyer were already seated. Brielle was gone. Marissa didn't look at Cole as she entered. She took the seat opposite him, placed her folder on the table, and folded her hands again. It was time to start pulling her life back, piece by piece. And she was ready. The conference room smelled faintly of lemon oil and tension. It was the kind of space designed to look neutral. Light gray walls, modern chairs, a sleek black table. But no amount of interior design could hide the truth. This was a battlefield in disguise. Marissa sat with her back straight, her hands resting lightly on the table. Her fingers, always composed in court, now moved slightly, thumb brushing the edge of her wedding ring. It was the last time she'd wear it, and she knew it. Across from her, Cole leaned back, one leg crossed over the other, a man still trying to convince the room that he was unbothered. But his right foot bounced beneath the table, a subtle betrayal of the calm expression on his face. Raymond sat beside her, a man of few wasted movements. He opened the folder slowly, placing 2 documents in front of him, but didn't speak yet. The silence itself had become its own weapon. Cole's attorney cleared his throat first. Our client is prepared to make a good faith effort to resolve this through equitable division, he began, adjusting his cufflinks without looking up. We propose a settlement based on the agreed prenuptial structure, with modest adjustments given the current market value of select assets. Marissa didn't move. Raymond looked at her, then back at Cole's lawyer. Your client's modest adjustments include stripping the marital ledger of over $4.3 million in assets, including artwork, vehicles, and club shares registered in both names. Cole leaned forward, finally speaking. You're not seriously arguing over golf memberships. Marissa's eyes met his. It's not about the golf. It's about the fact that every item you listed was purchased with joint income and labeled as marital expense. You didn't care about those details for 20 years, he snapped, before catching himself. Now you suddenly want to audit our whole life? No, she replied, calm but clear. Now I want to stop pretending I wasn't there. Cole opened his mouth again, but Raymond cut in. We also find it concerning that several luxury items, vintage watches, private art pieces, a jet lease, have mysteriously been reclassified as company expenditures in the last 14 months. It's all legal, Cole muttered, looking down. But not ethical, Marissa said. The room went still. Then, Raymond leaned forward. Let's talk about B.H. Lux. Cole flinched, not visibly, but enough. A flicker in the eyes, a subtle tension in the jaw. His lawyer tried to deflect. We've reviewed the documents submitted. There's no criminality here. No, Raymond agreed. But there's deception. And in family court, intent matters. Marissa tilted her head slightly. Tell me, Cole, did you create that company to help Braille build her brand? Or was it just a clever way to gift her my money while keeping your hands clean? Cole looked at her now. Really looked at her. For the first time all day. I don't owe you an explanation, he said, voice low. You're right, she replied. But you owe the court one. A long silence followed. The ticking of the clock on the far wall grew louder with every second. Finally, Cole's lawyer spoke again, voice carefully modulated. Let's move forward. Our client is willing to offer a one-time lump sum to the respondent in lieu of the disputed assets. A clean break. Raymond raised a brow. And how much is that? The attorney passed over a document. Raymond read it. His expression didn't change. But Marissa saw the slight pause in his breathing. He handed it to her. She read the number at the bottom of the page, then laughed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't bitter, but it stopped the room cold. $3 million, she said, placing the paper back on the table. You think my silence is worth $3 million? It's more than what's required, Cole's lawyer said carefully. Marissa leaned forward. Her voice, still soft, carried more weight than anything said all morning. Do you know how many nights I hosted investor dinners so Cole could impress partners who didn't even know my name? Do you know how many times I sat through zoning meetings, architect pitches, supplier conferences, not because I was paid to, but because I believed in what we were building? She shook her head. You can't put a price on what someone pours their soul into. Cole's jaw tensed. This isn't about soul, Marissa. This is business. She looked him dead in the eye. That's the problem. Raymond folded his hands. We're not accepting the offer. Cole's lawyer sighed. Then I guess we're going back to court. Looks that way, Raymond said evenly. Cole stood abruptly, pushing his chair back. You want to destroy everything over this? Really? Marissa stood too, slower. No. I want to walk away knowing I didn't let you destroy me. Their eyes held for a moment. Then she picked up the settlement offer, folded it once, and slid it back across the table. I suggest you bring a better number, she said quietly. Next time. She walked out first, her heels clicking against the tile, each step steady and sure. Outside the room, Miles stood by the window, pretending not to listen. When she approached, he glanced up. She didn't say anything, just slipped her arm through his. He looked at her, surprised. You okay? He asked. She nodded once. I'm not broken, she said, then added, almost to herself, just not finished. The soft murmur of the gallery behind her faded as Marissa stepped into the elevator once more, this time alone. She didn't look in the mirror-like surface of the doors. She already knew what she'd see. A woman unraveling and rebuilding herself, frame by frame, like a film in reverse. She pressed the button for the parking level and leaned back, finally exhaling. 3 million. Cole really thought that number would buy her silence, her dignity, her past, as if all of it could be packaged, priced, and swept off the table. The elevator landed with a hushed ding, and as she walked through the dim garage, her phone buzzed. Not a call, a message from Raymond. Need you tomorrow morning. Something's come up. Potential leverage. Don't tell anyone yet. She stared at the screen, her mind already turning. Leverage. That word felt like breath on dry soil. She tucked the phone back into her coat pocket and climbed into the driver's seat. She didn't play music on the ride home. Silence was her only soundtrack now, and it spoke louder than anything else. Back at the townhouse, the golden light of late afternoon slipped across the hardwood floor. She placed her keys in the dish by the door, kicked off her heels, and walked into the kitchen, where the smell of lavender and something faintly citrus lingered from the candle she'd forgotten she left burning. It was all so peaceful, too peaceful for a day like today. She poured herself a glass of water, sipped, and then finally picked up the framed photo on the counter. It was the three of them, Marissa, Cole, and Miles, smiling in the gardens of the High Museum after a charity gala. Marissa's dress was deep emerald. Cole's hand was at her waist, casual, possessive. Miles, only 15 then, towered beside them, all awkward limbs and crooked bow tie. She stared at it for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she set it face down on the counter and walked away. Upstairs, her closet was already missing half its contents. She had begun packing weeks before the hearing, not because she was running, but because she refused to be the one caught off guard. She sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through her emails until she found the name she was looking for. Delilah Carter, an old friend. Not close, not anymore, but sharp, reliable. A gallery curator with contacts in spaces Marissa hadn't stepped into since her marriage became her shadow. She typed, "Hi Delilah, I hope you're well. I know it's been a while. I have a favor to ask. There's a collection I curated years ago, and I'm trying to track provenance, values, and placement. Can you help me? I'll explain everything over coffee if you're available. Soon. Marissa. She hit send before she could second-guess it. As she stood to draw the curtains for the night, her phone buzzed again. This time, not from Raymond. Unknown. Number. You don't know me, but I used to work with your husband. Please don't ignore this. What you're fighting for, it's worse than you think. Marissa froze. Her heart skipped once, then once more. She stared at the message, fingers hovering above the screen. After a beat, she typed one word back. Who? A pause. Then 3 dots appeared. They blinked, paused, blinked again. Unknown number. My name is Victor Lang. I was Cole's project lead for Ashford North. I signed a lot of paperwork I shouldn't have. I have documents. I'm not proud of what I did, but I'm ready to fix it. She sat back down. Victor Lang. The name rang faintly in her memory. Someone she'd met once, maybe twice, at a ribbon cutting. Quiet, soft-spoken, a shadow behind Cole's charm. She replied, "Meet me tomorrow. Noon. Midtown Cafe. Come alone." Then she turned her phone over and stared out the window, watching the city glow beneath her, like a map of everything she was about to dismantle. The next morning, the cafe was half full, all murmured conversations and clinking teaspoons. Marissa sat by the window, a cappuccino untouched in front of her, watching the door. At exactly 12:03, a man in his early 40s entered, his coat wrinkled, his shoulders hunched. He scanned the room, eyes landing on her. He approached with hesitation, as if unsure she'd really come. "Mrs. Ashford?" he asked. "Marissa," she corrected gently. He nodded, sat across from her, and didn't waste time. "I know what I did helped him hide things." She didn't respond, just waited. Victor slid a flash drive across the table, his hand trembling slightly. "I copied everything before I left. Accounting files, internal memos, legal contracts he had us bury under consulting divisions, offshore accounts in the Caymans." Marissa's breath caught. "What do you want?" she asked. He looked her in the eye, and this time his voice didn't shake. "Nothing," he said. "I just want to stop waking up afraid of what I helped him become." She studied him for a long moment, then placed her hand over the flash drive. "Thank you," she said. As Victor stood to leave, he turned back once. "There's more," he said quietly. He didn't just funnel money. He changed dates on contract bids, fabricated vendor relationships. If you dig deep enough, there's criminal exposure. She nodded slowly. "Then we dig," she said. He gave a sad smile. "Good luck, Marissa. You're going to need it." She watched him leave. Then she picked up her phone and called Raymond. "I have something," she said. "And it's big." This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about truth. And for the first time since this began, she had something Cole couldn't buy his way out of. She had proof. Raymond Pierce didn't say much when Marissa handed him the flash drive, just raised one brow, pocketed it, and said, "I'll let you know what I find by morning." But the way his jaw set told her everything she needed to know. There was something on it, something real. She left his office just after 4 p.m., stepping out into the crisp Atlanta air with her coat cinched tight, her breath fogging slightly in the early spring chill. The city around her bustled, horns, crosswalks, sidewalk chatter. But her mind was quiet, focused, one step closer. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down. Delilah. Got your message. Curious already. Tomorrow work? 11 a.m.? I have something I want to show you too. Marissa smiled faintly, typing back. Perfect. Can't wait. She slid into her car, turned the key, and let the engine hum beneath her as she sat still for a moment, watching the people outside her windshield move through their lives without realizing they were walking past a woman unspooling 22 years of silence. That night, she didn't sleep. Not because of anxiety, but because for the first time in months, her thoughts were building forward instead of spiraling back. What she could do with the evidence, who else might come forward, what Cole would do when he realized the ground beneath him was no longer steady, and, most unsettling of all, what came after. Because freedom was frightening when you'd been owned by someone else's version of love for 2 decades. She lay in bed, eyes open, the ceiling fan turning slow circles above her. She thought of Cole, of his eyes across the courtroom, the arrogance, the emptiness, the control he still thought he had, and she thought of what she would say to him, if she had the chance, not as his wife, not as an opponent across a polished table, but as a woman who had finally, painfully, become her own. The next morning, Delilah met her at a quiet cafe, tucked between a gallery and a bookstore just outside Virginia Highlands. The place was half art studio, half espresso bar, exactly the kind of place Marissa used to lose herself in before Cole's schedule swallowed hers. Delilah was already seated near the back, hair swept up, glasses perched on her nose, a tablet in one hand and a coffee in the other. When Marissa entered, Delilah looked up, and her face lit up with surprise and something like recognition. "Look at you," she said, standing to hug her. "You haven't aged a day, just upgraded." Marissa laughed, letting the embrace land without apology. "It's called surviving." They sat, and after some small talk that neither of them really cared about, Delilah leaned forward. "You said you needed help tracking the Ashford collection." Marissa nodded. "Cole's trying to claim the whole thing was purchased through the company, that I had no legal stake, but I selected almost every piece. Half were gifted in our name." Delilah smirked. "Then lucky for you, I have a long memory and a petty streak. I pulled up the sales records from as far back as the Charleston exhibit in '08. You signed for 6 of those pieces, your names on the invoices." She turned her tablet around, showing Marissa the digitized documents. Even better, 2 of them were direct artist-to-buyer transfers, no gallery. Just you, the artist, and a check. Marissa blinked. "He doesn't have copies of these." Delilah smiled wider. "But I do." Marissa reached out, gently touching her hand. "Thank you." Delilah looked at her, eyes sharp but warm. "This isn't about art, is it?" Marissa hesitated, then said, "No, it's about not letting someone erase me from my own history." Delilah nodded once. "Then let's make sure the brushstrokes stay where they belong." Later that afternoon, Marissa walked through the doors of Ashford Properties for the first time in nearly a year. Not as Cole's wife, not as the silent half of the empire, but as a woman who had legal standing, evidence, and intention. She was met at the elevator by a receptionist who clearly wasn't expecting her. I'm sorry, do you have an appointment?" "I'm not here for Cole," Marissa said smoothly. "I'm here for Victor Lang's desk files. I believe his employment was terminated, but his name remains on several corporate contracts still tied to my divorce case. I'll only need 10 minutes. The receptionist stammered. Let me check with... Raymond Pierce already submitted the request to legal this morning." I'm just here to collect. A beat passed. Then the receptionist nodded stiffly. I'll escort you. She was led past the atrium, through the glass corridor that overlooked the inner courtyard, the same one where Cole used to host seasonal fundraisers, flanked by new investors and younger women. The same place she'd stood with a wineglass in hand, invisible in a dress she chose herself. Victor's desk was untouched. She collected a file box with 3 labeled binders, 2 flash drives, and a notepad that bore scribbles about contract timing, project budgets, and margin adjustments. At the bottom was a yellow sticky note, torn and faded. Just one word: sorry. She stood there for a long moment, holding that note. Not angry, not triumphant. Just sad. It didn't have to be this way, but it was. She turned to leave, and just as she rounded the corner toward the elevators, she heard a voice. Low, sharp, familiar. She doesn't have anything. It's smoke. She's bluffing, Cole. And now she froze. Another voice replied, someone from legal. If it's smoke, she's burning a lot of your bridges with it. Then silence. Then footsteps. Marissa stepped into a side corridor, hidden behind a privacy panel, heart racing. Not with fear, but something else entirely. A sense of shift, of balance, correcting. Cole walked past with a phone to his ear, pacing, dressed sharp, smiling for no one. Still carrying himself like the empire hadn't started cracking at the edges. He didn't see her, didn't even look. And somehow, that was perfect. She didn't need his eyes anymore. She had the truth. And it was finally louder than his silence. Rain tapped against the office windows like a soft metronome. The sky over Atlanta had shifted from gold to gray, casting a moody hue across Raymond's desk. Marissa sat across from him, watching as he connected the final file from Victor's flash drive to the flat-screen monitor between them. "Let me show you something," Raymond said, adjusting his glasses. Click. The screen filled with spreadsheets, dozens of hidden tabs, financial summaries, wire transfers, shell company invoices, all tied to Ashford Properties' largest developments. Victor was meticulous, he continued. He flagged every transaction he suspected was manipulated. Here's the thing. Most whistleblowers don't know what to look for. Victor did. Marissa leaned in, her arms crossed. How bad is it? Raymond scrolled to a highlighted section. Let's just say, if this lands in the judge's hands, Cole won't just lose the settlement. He might lose the company. Possibly more. She blinked, stunned for only a moment. And if we use it? He looked at her evenly. We change the entire negotiation dynamic. Cole's camp thinks this is a high-stakes divorce. But if this evidence becomes part of discovery, it shifts to potential fraud. The court could subpoena business partners. Investigate offshore transfers. He'll have no choice but to settle, quickly and quietly. Marissa sat back in her chair, tension easing just slightly from her shoulders. So what do we do first? Raymond smiled faintly. We wait. She furrowed her brow. Wait. He nodded. We let Cole stew. Let him think the leak is still coming. He'll panic, make mistakes, start talking too much to the wrong people. Marissa was quiet for a moment, then murmured, He's already talking too much. I heard him yesterday at the office. Raymond raised a brow. You went back there? She nodded. I wanted Victor's files. Walked right into the lion's den. Raymond chuckled softly, impressed. You're not the same woman who sat across from me 8 weeks ago. Marissa didn't smile, but her eyes flickered with something close to it. That woman was surviving. This one is ready. He nodded, then pushed a single manila envelope across the desk. What's this? Discovery request. Officially filed this morning. We're asking for every asset ledger associated with BH Lux, 4 subsidiary firms, and a dozen real estate holdings that were declared non-marital. It's aggressive, but it'll make him sweat. Marissa took the envelope slowly, fingers running over the seal. You think he'll cave? Raymond tapped the flash drive. He always thought he could control the story. This is the first time he's not the author. By the time Marissa arrived back at her townhouse, the rain had stopped but left the streets slick, reflecting headlights and storefront signs like smudged watercolors. She stepped inside, kicked off her heels, and sank onto the sofa. It wasn't just legal momentum that had shifted. It was emotional gravity. For the first time in months, she felt like she wasn't reacting to Cole. She was outpacing him. She closed her eyes and rested her head back, letting the silence stretch until the doorbell rang. She opened her eyes, confused. It was nearly 9 p.m. She padded barefoot across the hardwood, checked the peephole, and froze. Miles. She opened the door. His eyes were tired, hands in his coat pockets. No smile, just presence. Didn't think you'd be up, he said. She opened the door wider. I'm always up lately. He stepped inside, looking around as if he hadn't seen the place in years. I just came from dinner with Dad. Marissa raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He wanted to talk, Miles continued. Said he's disappointed in how the narrative's being twisted. Marissa tilted her head. Narrative? He thinks you're being influenced by outside forces. That you're only doing this because Raymond's poisoning you against him. A dry laugh escaped her lips. If only it were that simple. Miles dropped onto the edge of the couch. He asked me if I'd testify on his behalf. She looked at him, stunned. What? He didn't say it directly, Miles said, staring at the floor. But he mentioned how judges respect family unity. Then he brought up college tuition payments and the condo he helped me buy. Marissa sat down across from him, heart sinking. He's trying to buy your loyalty. Miles finally looked up. I told him no. Silence. You did? He nodded. I told him I wasn't going to be anyone's pawn. Not his, not yours. Marissa blinked, unsure what to say. But then he added, but I also told him that, for the first time, I see you. Not just as Mom, as a person. And I'm proud of you. Her breath caught. His voice cracked just a little. You're not hiding anymore. Marissa leaned forward, took his hand, squeezed it. Neither are you. They sat like that for a while. No grand speeches, no apologies. Just shared space in the aftermath of a fractured life, finally coming into view. The next morning, Marissa arrived early to Raymond's office. As she stepped into the building's marble lobby, her phone buzzed. Raymond. He's requested an emergency mediation session. Today, noon. Marissa stared at the message, adrenaline flushing through her chest. He blinked first. She texted back, on my way. Whatever Cole thought he was doing, buying time, salvaging pride, bluffing, he was walking into the one thing he never expected, her truth, and she was done hiding it. The conference room was colder this time, not in temperature, but in tone. Gone were the polite exchanges and veiled smiles. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. It was a reckoning. Cole sat at the far end of the long table, flanked by two attorneys who both looked like they hadn't slept. He was dressed in a charcoal suit, the same one he wore to board meetings that ended in applause. But there was no applause waiting here. Marissa entered the room with quiet confidence, flanked only by Raymond. No entourage, no dramatics, just presence. She took her seat directly across from Cole and didn't look away. "You asked for this session," Raymond began, laying his leather briefcase on the table. "So let's hear it." Cole cleared his throat, glanced at his lawyers, then leaned forward. "I don't think any of us benefit from dragging this out. The media is sniffing. Board members are asking questions. This isn't helping anyone." Marissa folded her hands in her lap, still silent. His tone shifted slightly. "I'm prepared to revisit the terms of the settlement. Add assets, liquidity. We can find something reasonable that—" Raymond cut in. "We're past reasonable, Cole. What you want is damage control." Cole's jaw tensed. His lawyer interjected. "We'd prefer to avoid trial. The documents your team submitted in last week's motion. They've raised red flags, yes, but nothing that can't be settled privately." Raymond calmly opened a folder. "We have documents showing falsified invoices, offshore transfers masked as consulting fees, and misappropriated marital funds. We also have a cooperating witness ready to testify under oath." Cole's face froze, but his hands gave him away, fingers drumming rapidly against the table. "Victor Lang," he said under his breath. Marissa finally spoke. "Funny how you remember his name now." His eyes snapped to hers. "You think this is justice?" "No," she said quietly. "Justice would be getting those years back." A long silence. Then Cole exhaled, leaning back. "What do you want, Marissa?" It wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't even angry. It was something else. Empty. Marissa looked at him, truly looked, and for the first time, she didn't see the man she married. She saw the man she'd survived. "I want what's fair," she said, voice steady. 50% of all joint assets, including those hidden under BH Lux and its subsidiaries, immediate transfer of titles on all marital properties, and your formal resignation from Ashford Properties. Raymond slid the printed terms across the table. Cole stared at the page, like it might bite. "This is aggressive," his lawyer said, glancing at the papers. "No," Raymond replied. "This is documented." Cole rubbed a hand over his jaw. "And if I refuse?" Raymond smiled slightly. "Then we go to court. We submit discovery. We subpoena your partners, your vendors, your financial officers. And when it's done, you won't just lose your company. You'll lose the illusion that you were ever in control." Cole's knuckles went white. He turned to Marissa. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. She met his eyes. "I spent 22 years making you look good, hosting dinners, smiling in photos, pretending the cracks weren't there. You took my loyalty for silence. You mistook my grace for weakness." She leaned forward. "I'm doing this because I finally remembered who I was before I met you, and I refuse to let you write the ending to a life I lived." Cole stared at her like he didn't recognize her anymore, and he didn't. Because she wasn't his anymore. He looked to his lawyers. They whispered, shuffled papers, one of them typing rapidly into a laptop. Then finally, his lead counsel nodded slowly. "We'll need 24 hours. But I think we can reach an agreement." Raymond nodded. "We'll expect the signed documents by tomorrow morning." The session ended without fanfare. No handshake, No parting words. Just Marissa rising from her chair, smoothing the sleeves of her jacket, and walking out, one step ahead. Outside the office building, the sun had returned, casting streaks of light across the pavement. Marissa paused on the sidewalk, letting the warmth touch her face. Raymond joined her a moment later. "You didn't flinch," he said, half smiling. "I did," she replied. "You just didn't see it." They walked a few paces in silence. Then Raymond asked, "Do you want to stop by the courthouse tomorrow? Sign everything in person?" She shook her head. "I want to be somewhere else." "Anywhere in mind?" Marissa hesitated, then smiled. "Yes. Actually, the garden behind the High Museum. There's a bench under the magnolia trees. I haven't sat there in over a decade." Raymond nodded. "Good choice." They parted ways, and Marissa stood for a moment, watching the city flow around her. Cars, voices, moments all colliding. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. One message waited. "Miles, proud of you, Mom. Let me know when you want to grab dinner. Just us this time." She smiled, her heart full in a way it hadn't been for years. She typed back, "Soon, very soon," and for the first time, she believed it. The morning sky broke open with a quiet calm, brushed in soft grays and pale light that filtered through Marissa's bedroom window. The air smelled like rain, though the forecast had promised sun. Somehow, it felt right. Like the world itself knew something was shifting. She stood before the mirror, not adjusting her makeup or her hair, but simply looking. The woman staring back was different now. She wasn't waiting. Not for apologies. Not for justice. Not even for closure. She was walking into it. Her phone buzzed once. Then again. 2 back-to-back notifications. The first was from Raymond. Document signed. Settlement finalized. The second was from Delilah. Thought you might want to see this. Attached was a screenshot. Marissa opened it. The headline took her breath. Cole Ashford resigns amid investor shakeup. Sources suggest ongoing legal disputes. She exhaled, slow and steady. The man who once commanded boardrooms with a half smile and a handshake was finally stepping down. Not because he chose to, but because he had no other option. There were no dramatic press conferences, no clever spin. Just a single sentence buried halfway through the article. Mr. Ashford has declined to comment. That silence, his silence, was everything she'd waited to hear. By noon, she sat under the magnolia trees behind the High Museum, just like she'd told Raymond. The air was warm, the petals trembling slightly in the soft wind. A group of students passed by, laughing. An older couple sat across the path, sharing a bag of grapes. Life kept moving, and for the first time, she didn't feel like it was leaving her behind. She reached into her bag and pulled out the one thing she hadn't let go of yet. The photograph, the one of her, Cole, and Miles, the gala, the emerald dress, the carefully constructed image of a family. She looked at it a long while, then she folded it, clean, quiet, in half, and slid it gently into her notebook. Not to destroy it, not to forget it, just to finally make room for something else. Her phone buzzed again. This time, the message was short, simple, from Brielle. "Meet me." No greeting, no explanation, just that. Marissa stared at the message. She hadn't seen or heard from Brielle since the early hearings. Her presence had haunted the narrative from the edges, spoken about, but rarely visible, until now. After a pause, Marissa typed back, "Where?" The reply came seconds later. "Riverview Tower, 22nd floor lounge. Now." She almost laughed. That building. It was the same tower Cole had taken her to years ago when he pitched his first luxury condo expansion. The beginning of his empire. The dream he sold her, and sold himself. Now Brielle was summoning her there. She stood slowly from the bench, gathering her things. This wasn't part of the plan. But maybe. It needed to be. The 22nd floor was as pristine as she remembered. Floor-to-ceiling glass, polished marble, and a hush that felt too perfect to be real. Brielle stood at the far end by the window, a flute of something sparkling in her hand. She turned when she heard Marissa approach. For a second, neither woman spoke. Then Brielle said, "You look good." Marissa smiled faintly. "You look tired." A beat, then a small, humorless laugh from Brielle. "Touché." Marissa stepped closer but didn't sit. "Why am I here?" Brielle sipped her drink, then placed it on the table. "Because I wanted to say it before it hits the headlines." Marissa waited. "I'm out," Brielle said. "Not just from Cole's life, from the business, the properties, the spotlight, all of it." Marissa raised an eyebrow. "Burnout already?" Brielle shook her head. "No, just clarity." She moved to the edge of the window, looking out over the skyline. "When I met him, I thought I was trading up. From meaningless flings to a man who built things, who knew how to move in powerful circles, but he never wanted a partner. He wanted a mirror." Marissa's expression didn't change. Brielle turned back toward her. "I thought he left you because you were cold. Bored. I thought I could be what he needed." A long pause. "And then I realized it wasn't you." Marissa's eyes narrowed slightly. "He's just empty," Brielle said, voice soft now. "And he fills that emptiness with things, people, power, until it spills out of him and ruins everything." She walked closer, but still didn't touch her. "I'm not here to apologize. I'm not that noble. I just wanted to say, you didn't lose. You just let go first." Marissa studied her. This wasn't pity or regret. It was recognition. They were two women who'd both been consumed by the same man's orbit, only to escape it with their names still intact. "You were never my enemy," Marissa said quietly. Brielle nodded. "And he was never your equal." Silence stretched again, strangely comfortable now. Then Marissa turned to leave. At the door, she paused. "One more thing," she said without turning around. Brielle looked up. "If you ever go looking for love again, don't start by trying to become someone else." And then she walked away, the sound of her heels echoing softly in the room behind her. Outside, the sky had begun to break open again, not with rain, but with light, and it felt like the beginning of something real. Marissa stood by the glass doors of the Riverview Tower, letting the cool afternoon air settle on her skin as she walked out. Her steps were slower now, not from hesitation, but from awareness. She felt the weight of everything behind her, and for once, it didn't crush her. It clarified her. She reached the parking deck, opened her car door, and paused before getting in. The city buzzed below. People moved in their daily rhythms, unaware of the private wars happening in rooms high above them. She took one last look back at the tower, at the 22 floors of illusion, ambition, seduction, and regret. then got into her car and drove. She didn't go home. Instead, she drove past the turn, past the freeway entrance, and toward the edge of the city, towards something that had been sitting in the back of her mind for weeks now. An unfinished thread. 15 minutes later, she pulled into a quiet lot beside an old brick building in Inman Park. The art co-op. Still open, still tucked behind the trees and stone archways. It hadn't changed much in 20 years. She stepped inside and was instantly wrapped in the smell of paint, sawdust, and turpentine. Canvases leaned against every surface. Light filtered in through skylights, catching on flecks of color in the air. A voice called from the back. "Be right with you." Marissa walked slowly, taking in the textures, the unfinished portraits, the pottery shelves, the sketchbooks, scattered like open thoughts. Then she saw him. Quinn. Still in paint-stained jeans, sleeves rolled to the elbow, smudge on his cheek, like always. He turned when he saw her, and froze mid-step. "Marissa?" She smiled, soft but certain. "Hi," he blinked. "It's been, what, 10 years?" 12, she said. "But who's counting?" He walked closer, a little stunned. "You look incredible." "I feel like myself," she said. That seemed to hit him somewhere deeper. They stood in the middle of the workshop, surrounded by unfinished beauty, and shared the kind of silence that wasn't awkward, but thick with memory. "I almost didn't come," she admitted. "But I was nearby and—" "You remembered." She nodded. They had met here years ago, before Cole, before the glittering parties and long silences. She had taken a 6-week class in charcoal drawing, and he was the instructor. It was innocent. But he'd seen her, not as a wife, not as a socialite, as a soul. She'd never forgotten that. Quinn cleared his throat, stepping back slightly. "I actually thought of you a few months ago. Saw your name in some article, something about an art collection lawsuit." Marissa laughed softly. "Sounds about right." He tilted his head. "You're okay?" "I am now." Another beat. "Want to see something?" She nodded, and he led her through the space to a back wall. There, covered in a white linen cloth, stood a large canvas. He pulled the cloth down slowly. It was an abstract portrait. Brushstrokes layered in soft creams, bold ochres, and sharp slashes of navy. A figure emerged from the chaos. Not detailed, not literal, but unmistakably feminine. Strong, surrounded by noise, but untouched by it. Marissa stared, breath caught. "She doesn't look like she's hiding," she said. "She isn't," Quinn replied. "She's remembering." Marissa swallowed hard. "Did you paint this for me?" "I painted it after you," he said. "But maybe because of you." She reached out, fingertips hovering just above the paint. "I think I'm finally ready to start again," she whispered. He smiled. "Then let's." Later that evening, Marissa sat alone at a small patio table outside a wine bar in Grant Park. A light breeze danced through the trees. String lights overhead flickered softly. She wasn't waiting for anyone. She was simply being. Her phone vibrated. A message. "Miles, dinner tomorrow still good?" She replied immediately. "Yes." "Tell me where. I'll be there." Another buzz. "Raymond. Judge has filed the final orders. Everything is now official. You're free." Marissa stared at the message. Free. Not just divorced. Not just distanced. Free. She let the word echo. Then, slowly, She opened her purse and pulled out the folded photo again. This time she didn't hesitate. She walked to the fire pit at the edge of the patio, unfolded the picture, and held it above the low flame. Her hands didn't shake. The image curled quickly, edges darkening, face fading. And as the last corner turned to ash, she felt something in her chest loosen. She turned, walked back to her table, and lifted her glass of wine toward the sky, to closure, to freedom, to the woman who came back. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning that was always waiting. The dinner reservation was for 6:30, but Marissa arrived at 6. The place was quiet, nestled on the corner of a cobbled street in Midtown, an old converted brownstone with vines climbing the brick and warm candlelight, spilling through the tall windows. The kind of place where people whispered over glasses of wine and shared secrets over small plates. She stood outside for a moment, watching the city settle into its evening rhythm. The air was humid, sweetened with jasmine, and something almost citrus in the breeze. Atlanta in early spring could be strange like that, half invitation, half memory. When she walked in, the hostess recognized her name immediately and led her to a table near the fireplace. She sat facing the door. Marissa didn't just want to see her son walk in. She needed to. A server brought her sparkling water and smiled politely. "Will someone be joining you?" She nodded. "Yes, he's on his way." Exactly 4 minutes later, Miles stepped through the door. He was taller than she remembered, though she saw him weakly, somehow more grounded in his own presence. His expression softened the moment he saw her, and he gave a small wave as he approached. "Hey, Mom." "Hey, baby." They hugged, longer than usual. No rush. He pulled out his chair, took a sip of the water already poured for him, and looked around the place. "Nice choice," he said. "Very you." She smiled. "I'm learning what that means again." He met her eyes. "You're different." Marissa tilted her head. "In a good way?" "In a real way." They placed their orders. Something light, nothing elaborate. Neither of them were here for the food. They ate slowly, between stories about his classes and her new habit of sketching again at night. Midway through the meal, Miles set down his fork and leaned in slightly. "I need to tell you something." Marissa's stomach tightened. "Okay." "Dad called me again. Yesterday." She nodded, bracing for whatever came next. "He was calm this time," Miles continued. "Almost resigned. He asked me if I hated him." Marissa inhaled, her hands stilling on the linen napkin in her lap. "What did you say?" "I told him I don't. But I don't admire him anymore either." Marissa's chest ached gently. Miles kept going. "He said something I wasn't expecting. He said, 'I don't know who I became.' And I believed him." She searched his face for bitterness, but there was none, only truth. "I think," Miles added, "that he finally saw the hole he dug, and maybe, just maybe, he's standing in it now without blaming anyone else." Marissa nodded slowly. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to hear your own voice again." They let that sit for a moment. Then Miles asked, "Do you miss him?" The question was soft, not intrusive, just real. Marissa didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands, then up at the flicker of the candle between them. "I miss the man I thought he was," she finally said. "The man I loved in my 20s, the dream we built together. But I don't miss the way I disappeared inside it." Miles didn't speak. He just reached across the table and held her hand. "I'm proud of you," he said again. But this time, not just because you stood up to him. She looked at him, puzzled. He smiled. I'm proud of you for finding your next. Most people just survive the wreck. You're building something after it. Marissa's throat tightened. Her son wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man who saw her. Not just as a mother, but as a person. When dessert came, they shared it without pretense. Just warm spoonfuls of chocolate and laughter about how neither of them could ever say no to it. As they stepped out into the night, Miles kissed her cheek and walked her to her car. "Call me when you get home," he asked. "Of course." He lingered for a moment before heading to his own car. Marissa sat behind the wheel but didn't start the engine right away. Instead, she opened her phone. There were no urgent emails, no missed calls, just a single message waiting from a contact labeled simply, Q. "Want to come see the new studio space? I've got something to show you," she smiled, then replied, "Be there in 20. As she pulled onto Peachtree Street, a song came on the radio, something soft, unfamiliar, but hopeful. The kind of music that felt like it belonged to someone starting again. And in that moment, with the city glowing in her mirrors, her son safe and steady, and someone new waiting just ahead, Marissa knew the past no longer defined her. It simply built the bridge to her future. The new studio wasn't in a gallery district or tucked inside a glossy downtown building. It was on the edge of Reynoldstown, in a reclaimed textile mill with exposed brick and high ceilings that caught the light just right. The kind of place where you could breathe deeper, where the silence didn't echo but hummed. Marissa pulled into the gravel lot and turned off the engine. The radio faded. The night was still, and her heartbeat was steady in her chest. She stepped out and closed the door gently behind her. The click echoed faintly as she walked toward the entrance, where a single bulb lit a wooden sign that read, Quinn Co., Creative Collective. Before she could knock, the door opened. "You're early," Quinn said, smiling. "You're lucky I came at all," she teased. He held the door open and stepped aside. "Come in, shoes off, rules of the space." She kicked off her heels at the door, padding barefoot across the smooth concrete floor. The air smelled like eucalyptus, paint, and possibility. The studio was warm, lit not with harsh fluorescence but soft pendant lights, some wrapped in paper shades, some just bare bulbs glowing like quiet stars. "Thought I'd be showing you the new sculpture," Quinn said, leading her through the space. "But then I finished something else instead." He stopped in front of a canvas covered with a soft gray drape. Marissa raised an eyebrow. "You've been mysterious all week." He chuckled. "Guilty. But this isn't just art. It's a risk." He didn't wait for her to answer. He pulled the cloth away in one fluid motion. The canvas underneath was unlike anything he'd shown her before. Still abstract, yes, but deeply personal. It wasn't a portrait. It was a moment. A woman standing at the edge of a shore. Storm clouds behind her. Sunlit sky ahead. The waves didn't crash. They shimmered. And the woman wasn't walking away or toward. She was rooted. Eyes open. Hair loose in the wind. And behind her, just the faintest outline of a city skyline, crumbling. Marissa's hand moved to her mouth, breath catching. "I didn't want to tell your story," Quinn said softly. "I wanted to show the moment you chose it." She didn't speak for a while, just stood there, letting her chest rise and fall, her heart beat against something she hadn't let herself name yet. When she finally looked at him, her eyes glistened. No one's ever painted me like that. He stepped closer. No one's ever seen you like this. She felt the heat rise in her throat, the kind that wasn't about romance or grief, but recognition. You didn't ask permission, she said gently. No, Quinn replied, but I hoped for grace. She nodded, blinking quickly. You have it. He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. A silence settled between them, not empty, not awkward, just full. The kind of silence that makes space for something to grow. I think I'm scared, she admitted, finally. Of what? He asked. That if I let someone in again, I might lose the version of me I just found. Quinn didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the back corner of the room and returned with a smaller canvas. He handed it to her. It was blank. Nothing on it. Just pure, untouched space. I think, he said, that the version of you now knows how to hold the brush. Her fingers curled around the edge of the canvas. No one had ever said it quite like that. She set it down gently, like it meant more than anything that had come before. Would you want to paint something together? She asked, surprising herself with the words. Quinn smiled. Only if you promise not to stay inside the lines. They both laughed, soft and a little unsteady. Then he moved to the paint table, handing her a brush and a jar of deep blue acrylic. Let's make a mess, he said. Marissa dipped the brush into the paint, let the excess drip slowly back into the jar, then swept the first stroke across the canvas. Not perfect, but absolutely hers. And as the hours slipped by, music humming low, laughter spilling in bursts, two people standing barefoot in the center of their own creation, Marissa realized something. This wasn't about starting over. It was about continuing, with intention, with color, with truth, and maybe, just maybe, with someone who saw the art in her scars and the story in her silence. The invitation arrived on heavy cream stationery, handwritten in deep ink, sealed with gold foil. The Emerson Foundation invites you to the unveiling of the Women's Justice Fellowship, honoring Marissa Langford for her enduring courage and contribution to social equity. Marissa read it twice, then once more. It had been 6 months since the verdict, since her name had moved from courtroom whispers to quiet headlines, since Cole had sold his remaining stakes and vanished into the silence of his own making, and since she'd stopped being a story others told and started living her own. Now, in the early morning light of her new condo, a smaller, sun-drenched loft in Grant Park, she stood barefoot on the balcony, sipping tea, the skyline stretching before her like a clean slate. Behind her, Quinn's voice drifted from the kitchen. They spelled your name right this time. That alone deserves champagne. She turned, laughing. At 9 a.m.? Exactly when victories should be toasted. He walked out with 2 mismatched mugs, one hers, one his, and leaned against the railing beside her. You really going to speak? He asked, eyes scanning her face. Marissa took a breath. I think I have to. Quinn nodded. Then say what no one expects. She tilted her head. Like what? Like what it cost you to be graceful. What it cost to not shatter the room when you had every right to. Marissa looked out again at the skyline. That's not easy. He reached for her hand. Nothing honest ever is. The auditorium buzzed with quiet anticipation. It wasn't a massive event, maybe 100 guests. But they were the right ones, lawyers, advocates, women's rights foundations, law students, journalists, judges. Marissa stood backstage, palms damp despite the calm expression on her face. Raymond waited beside her, straightening his tie, exuding his usual unshakable calm. He leaned in slightly, You know, I've spoken at over 100 panels. None of them mattered like this one. She smiled. That's because you weren't defending your friend in those. Friend and client, he corrected. In that order. Then the doors opened, and the crowd hushed as the host stepped to the podium. A woman who redefined not just her role, but her power, who turned silence into strategy, and whose story reminds us that justice is not always loud, but it is always necessary. Applause rose like a wave. Marissa walked on stage. She didn't wear black today. She wore deep emerald, the kind of color that rooted her. Strong, intentional, alive. The lights warmed her face. The microphone was steady beneath her fingers. She began. When you're the wife of a powerful man, people assume you live a powerful life. A beat. They see the home, the diamonds, the invitations. They don't see the erasure, the days you go unheard, the nights you sleep beside someone who doesn't see you. The room fell still. I spent years performing grace, smiling through betrayal, dressing up my silence so it looked like elegance. But it wasn't grace. It was grief in disguise. Murmurs moved like wind through the crowd. And then one day, that silence cracked. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with a decision. I'm not disappearing anymore. She paused, letting the echo settle. When the courtroom became my stage, I didn't raise my voice. I raised my truth, and I watched a man who once held my heart realize, too late, that I had always held the power. Applause swelled, soft and sincere. But this isn't just about me, she continued. This is about every woman who's been told she's too much or not enough. Every woman who's been expected to endure what others wouldn't survive. Every woman who's ever asked herself, what will they say if I finally say the truth? She looked out over the audience, faces rapt, still. Let them talk, she said. And while they do, build, protect your peace, tell your story, and when you're ready, stand tall in it. The applause this time didn't swell. It erupted. Later that evening, the city glowed with soft golden light as Marissa stepped out of the gala, heels in hand, speech in her purse. Quinn waited by the car, leaning casually, sleeves rolled, hair messy from the wind. Well? He asked. She smiled. I said what they didn't expect. He opened the door for her. I'd expect nothing less. They drove with the windows down, the wind playing with the hem of her dress. Silence easy between them. As they reached the loft, he parked but didn't get out. What if I asked you something? He said quietly. And you didn't have to answer right away. She turned toward him. Try me. He hesitated, just enough to make it matter. I'm not asking for a promise, he said. Just space beside you. To paint, to live, to grow. Together. Marissa didn't speak. She simply reached across the console and took his hand, not as a signal of ownership, but of presence. Yes, she said softly. To space, to presence, to possibility. He smiled, then added, and maybe someday, to us. She smiled back. Let's see what we create. And as they stepped out of the car, the stars above seemed closer, the night softer. Marissa didn't look back. There was nothing left behind her worth returning to, only forward, only freedom, only the life she now owned in full. Brush in hand, heart open, future unwritten. And hers. Thanks for watching Sky Millionaire, where kindness meets real life. At Sky Millionaire, we believe every act of generosity deserves to be shared. So stay tuned and keep spreading hope with Sky Millionaire.